What is up, Bitcoiners? It's CK sitting here with my man, Ansel Lindner. Today has been an action-packed day. This morning has been an absolutely action-packed morning in Bitcoin price, equity prices, news updates, Powell talking to Congress. There's a lot to talk about today, and there's a lot of awesome stuff coming up in the future of Fed Watch. Ansel and I are working on getting some really top-notch guests on. Ansel, how you doing? How you feeling these days?
Oh, Christian, I am doing great. Yes, we have had some interesting times with the price, but for the Fed Watch show and are the listeners here, the reason why they listen to this show is to break down the macro stuff, to break down the central bankers and what they're saying. So that has been with Powell having his testimony. We have some for the central bank nerds out there. We have some exciting stuff to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, no other show talks about Bitcoin in the context of macro like we do, and no other show goes deep into what these central bankers are talking about. So you're not going to miss anything when you're paying attention to Fed Watch. But before we get into that, let's talk about Bitcoin 2021. I mean, we just announced Michael Saylor as a speaker yesterday. That generated a lot of hubbub. And we are working on hunting down even more fantastic speakers. The energy, the excitement, the zeal for both Bitcoin and Miami is palpable. I can feel it. I can see it in the ticket flow. This event is going to sell out. Straight up, it's going to sell out. I'm going to be there. Hopefully, Ansel's going to be there. I need to get that confirmation from Ansel's better half. But you guys, every Bitcoiner stateside is going to be there. Use code Satoshi, all caps, Satoshi, to get 10% off. Ansel's rocking his I am Satoshi Nakamoto shirt. And yeah, Satoshi will get you 10% off ticket prices. Ticket prices go up by $100 on March 5th. So get your ticket now. This event will sell out. It's going to be the Bitcoin event of the decade. I'm so excited. But that's enough of me. That's enough of Bitcoin 2021. Let's get into this action-packed agenda. The first line item we have here, Ansel, is price action. It's just so funny how price will whip you around. Bitcoin is here to shake out weak hands. It is here to take the path of most pain. But at the same time, Bitcoiners aren't they're not scared. We're not feeling much pain. We're used to experiencing 30% drawdowns. Do you have any 2 cents about Bitcoin price?
Well, this bull market has been quite a bit faster than the 2016-17 cycle. If you look at, where the price has risen to in this amount of like weeks, say, since the halving, it's a lot faster this time around. So we could have a period where we slow down here. I was just starting to get bullish, but I did expect some resistance at these round numbers, 50,000, 60,000. And so it looks like this resistance at 60 has really pushed us back down. We just completed a 30% consolidation, and now we're at another 20% consolidation. Overall, this is very, very healthy because that means, we're not getting over our skis and too far ahead of ourselves. And slow and steady wins the race. And for Bitcoin, slow and steady is what, like 5% a week? That would be slow and steady.
Yeah, I mean, I remember you were like quoting a stat line like over Bitcoin's history averages like is it 1% a day or something like that? I remember that was a stat line you quoted like back in 2018 or 2017. Is that hubbub? Is that gibberish?
Oh yeah, that probably back from 2018. I haven't run those numbers in recent memory, but yeah, it was a period where if you went out back in time, 1% a day is what Bitcoin increased in price. And that is pretty incredible.
Yeah, I'd be curious to run the numbers on that and see what pace we're at now. You take all of Bitcoin's history divided by how many days it's been alive and see what percentage is increased. Like this is truly a once in a lifetime, once in generations type of asset and monetization event.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what else should we talk about in regards to price? I
Well,
was thinking this Tether news was going to be more bullish. Should we jump into the Tether news?
yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny that you know, the Bitcoin price action seems to be completely and utterly disconnected from news, right? An example is, Bitcoin hits 58K over the weekend, and immediately dumps, but kind of during that dumping period, this is when MicroStrategy is acquiring over $1 billion in Bitcoin. This is when, the biggest uncertainty from a outsider's perspective in the Bitcoin space, Tether, is clearing up, issues. So if you are a Bitcoin insider, these are opportunities to buy the dip because we understand the fundamentals that are happening. And obviously, the price isn't 100% correlated with it. What's your take on that?
Well, yeah, I think Tether was a big source of uncertainty out there. And uncertainty is always bad for price. As uncertainty goes up, usually you get sell offs. In this case, uncertainty went down, and we seem to be getting a sell off. So we have to just, I mean, I'm also a big believer, as Max Kaiser says all the time, that news follows price. So perhaps this news was known by insiders, known by people weeks ago. And that's one reason why we broke out when we did weeks ago, when they were just finalizing this type of settlement with Tether. And now we get, weeks later, we get the inevitable drop of the announcement itself. So, we have to look at all the ways that different things are playing off in the market. But one thing is for sure, that the fundamentals are extremely strong right now. We didn't even mention the ETF up in Canada that bought like $240 million worth of Bitcoin in 2 days. So we'll see where all of these things end up in the next 6 months.
Yeah, so for Bitcoin Magazine, I have been covering the ETF news out of Canada, and I'm glad that you brought it up because it's not a line item here. But this is an obvious sign at the demand from retail for Bitcoin, right? So, kind of going to the Tether news, a lot of the Tether truthers, haters, skeptics, you know, they ultimately were using Tether in order to validate their preconceived notion that there is no legitimate demand for Bitcoin. And I would say between obviously this kind of settlement between IFINX and the New York Attorney General, as well as like the literally historic volume numbers on this Canadian ETF BTCC, um, it is kind of proving again in real life that there is legitimate demand for Bitcoin. Obviously Ansel and I believe that there's not only legitimate demand for Bitcoin, but that demand is going to continue to explode. And looking at BTCC from an ETF perspective, it is the biggest ETF in Canadian history, period, already in terms of initial trading volume the day it launched, as well as trajectory. But if you were to compare it to American ETFs, its day 1 and 2 would be in the top 5 of all American ETFs, and this is a Canadian ETF. Like the demand for this product is absolutely unreal, and it makes you go to think that like what happens when when an ETF actually gets approved on the US markets, right? This is going to be one of the biggest products in the New York Stock Exchange on day 1. It's going to open up as one of the biggest products, and I think that it's just going to be a massive testament to Bitcoin's hyper monetization that is currently happening.
Yeah, one of the reasons cited for not approving an ETF in the United States was that the markets weren't ready for mature enough, right, to handle it. But look, no market might be mature enough to handle a Bitcoin ETF. It might break, it might limit up the system, right? And so many people have talked about this. Peter Fee from Interactive Brokers, he's one of the big guys that says that Bitcoin has a possibility to bankrupt the clearinghouses. And if an ETF comes on board and there's an unleash of this huge demand out there, there is a possibility that Bitcoin limits up everybody. And it's could be an exciting day for Bitcoiners, but kind of a scary day for the system too. So there is that kind of thing to worry about.
On the 18th, Arthur Hayes actually wrote a blog post for BitMEX, the first kind of public article that came out, or even like kind of public word from Arthur since the whole BitMEX debacle earlier in 2020. And he focuses in on what happened on GameStop. I highly recommend the read. I think everyone should go read it. It's on the BitMEX blog. And he kind of talks about the underlying processes that happened with the clearinghouses and why Robinhood, TD Ameritrade, and several other brokerages had to, pause trading on specific stocks because they did not have the collateral to clear it with the clearinghouse, and it takes over 48 hours for stocks to clear over within the clearinghouses that these brokerages use. So if similar dynamics kind of play out with a Bitcoin ETF that is skyrocketing in value, it might actually break this infrastructure. Like, I don't think this infrastructure is made to deal with assets that move like this, and assets that, again, going through a hyper monetization event. Like, this is not something that is inherent to just Bitcoin. It's something that is it's just part of a once in a lifetime process of Bitcoin going from nothing to the value system for the world.
I agree. I don't have much else to add on that. Well, on the Tether news, I can just say that I'm glad that it's worked out the way it has. They didn't admit any wrongdoing, and they just got a slap on the wrist for really doing nothing. And then a lot of people were throwing shade that saying, "Oh, but now they can't do business in New York." Well, they never did business in New York anyway, so it doesn't really matter. This was a win for Tether, in my opinion, and good. Oh, you're muted.
I think this is a good place to transition to what Powell has been saying to Congress this morning. And for the listeners, you're listening to this tomorrow on February 24th, but today is February 23rd. Kind of contrary to what we've been covering in previous statements from Powell, he said the digital dollar is a priority. And he said that while digital dollars are important, it's not important that necessarily the U.S. is first there. I do think that it's kind of funny that he's kind of backtracking and is unable to shake this digital dollar narrative in question. But on the flip side, his inability to recognize that the U.S. actually, the dollar is first to the digital dollar or to the digital fiat race. If anything, it's the only player there. Like, this is why Europe is sweating. This is why every other central bank is sweating, because Tether is here. USDC is here. GUSD is here. All of these things, as far as I'm concerned, they're digital dollars that are market delivered. And this has been a theme and a topic that we've discussed multiple times on this podcast.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they said, "Hey, ease up on Tether," because, like the Fed talked to the New York Attorney General, say, "Ease up on Tether because we need them to fulfill this role for us," or something like that. But they always sound the same whenever they talk about the digital dollar. They use the words, they're looking carefully at it. They want to make sure private actors that can issue their own money don't destabilize the system. They say things like they are looking for transparency to work with their stakeholders, and that they have this responsibility as the reserve currency. And then the only thing new that they said, or that he said in this testimony today, was he used that word high priority, or the two words high priority. So I wouldn't read too much into that. I I think this is the same old thing that they've been taking the same exact stance the whole time through.
Okay. Something that is interesting is, this conversation between Powell and Congress, this was a high level conversation. This is about what is happening now in the economy. And yet the digital dollar is a topic that is discussed, and Bitcoin is a topic that is brought up within the first half an hour. So I think that is a sign just showing Bitcoin's relevance. We're gonna jump into Bitcoin's relevance in macro matters in a little bit, but I do want to focus in on some of his statements around rates moving, expectations of inflation, identifying inflation deficits. Powell talked about a lot here.
Yeah, I took some notes. I didn't get a chance to watch the entire 2.5 hours yet. I just watched up to the digital dollar point. But he did talk about they think they may, quote, may see prices picking up as the economy reopens, end quote, and that they do not see inflation running over target in an uncontrollable way. So I think that they have the tools. They know they have the tools to fight inflation, but what they don't have the tools to do is to fight deflation. And he even said that rates are moving up because of the expectation that the economy will improve, not because the economy is actually improving, but because of the expectation. And see, these are some of the type of words that I notice that tells me that they don't know how to get how to overheat the economy themselves. They don't have the tools to do that. They have the tools to fight inflation, not create inflation. And yeah, I just pick up on all that the little nuance in what he says.
Yeah, and I was listening to a podcast where someone was pointing to gold's price and its stability as kind of being an indicator that inflation is not happening. They are unable to heat things up, and you know, as the co-host of this show and having spoken to you for so long, I would say no shit, right? Like you literally can't wave your magic wand and make people behave a certain way. That's impossible. Like they need to be incentivized naturally, and you can only kind of like mess with or augment or manipulate the macro incentives that people are acting on so much. Like there's limits to that.
Yeah, man, you make me think of altcoins. They think that they can just program these minute, nuanced incentives into their protocol and make people act a certain way. And then they are surprised when a hacker exploits them, right? So that's just remind me of that.
Is the Fed monetary policy consistently being hacked by
Oh, yeah.
independent players?
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. I would say, like, yeah, the banks are using the code or using the protocol that the Fed has dictated to them and just not behaving the way that the Fed wants them to behave. So, yeah, the banks are exploiting this central bank based protocol for a monetary system. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Very, very interesting. I like that angle. I feel like we should continue on that thought pattern. Um, Regarding altcoiners, like I've been saying this for a long time, but I think altcoins, DeFi, it's just skeuomorphic. It is people who are unable to transition from the existing system, the existing mindset, the existing mental model into the Bitcoin mental model. But they're trying to bolt the existing mental model on top of a blockchain, on top of distributed ledgers. And it's really comical that maybe they have the same assumptions. Maybe they think that, hey, we can program all of these incentives. We can dictate how users are going to do things with our token economics. And the reality is you can't. They're going to exploit you, which we've seen many times in DeFi. And ultimately, nature is nature, and the best money is a money that reflects that nature, which is why Bitcoiners push for sound money rather than some top-down tokenomics.
Oh, I absolutely agree. I think that altcoiners, they don't. I mean, we could talk about that all day. They don't to get the money aspect of it. They don't get the incentives of it. So One thing I thought Powell said that was very interesting was that deficits do matter. Did you catch that? And what did you think about him saying that?
Well, he said deficits do matter, but not right now. And we'll deal with it later. And the time to deal with it is in the future. Classic, right? Kick the can down the road, let future population, future heads of the Fed deal with it. I think that this kind of commentary is exactly why they will never deal with it, and why, Bitcoin is not only necessary, but inevitable, because it is the only thing that is going to that's going to force them to clean up their act. The fact that there is now an alternative that is shedding light to their brokenness.
Yeah, enforce monetary responsibility on people. You know where I'm going to go with this, but I think that it's interesting. He did say that deficits do matter in the long run, because this is the idea of MMT, is that deficits don't matter. And I just want to keep pointing this out to people, that the Fed is not on the brink of going down the route of MMT, that they don't like it. They don't agree with it. And Powell talks about this all the time, that he was asked directly about MMT, and he's like, no, I don't agree with that. So, yeah, I just want to point that out for listeners once again.
So, Ansel, let's kind of tease out why you think this is so important, because hyperinflation, MMT is inevitable. These are narratives that Bitcoiners push pretty hard. And I think that you think that they're incorrect narratives flat out. Can you kind of speak to, despite the banking system not, playing ball with the Fed, not doing what the Fed wants, taking advantage of the system in ways that they want, why are central banks going to deal with that? Why aren't they just going to go around the banking system and go directly to the people? Like, that's the idea of both these like like this idea of CBDCs as well as MMT, is let's just go around the commercial banking system. Let's go directly to the people, directly to their wallets. We have the technology. Why is that reality, or why is that kind of anticipated reality not likely to happen in your mind?
Well, I think the bankers, the economists, I mean, the school of thought that is prevalent is like a neo-Keynesian or a monetarist type school of thought. And even then, they recognize the role of the free market. And they know that central planning is not a replacement for free market activity. And if they route around the banks that they see as free market entities, even though they're really not, but let's just say that they think that they know that they aren't going to be able to do what they want. They don't believe in central planning, even though they are big central planners. They want to take a light hand touch as much as possible, because that is still philosophically, that is their school of thought, that they are still somewhat free market oriented, and they know that they don't want to go down like a complete command and control economy, like say the USSR or some communist country. So I think that's holding them back from doing something like that.
But politicians want a complete command and control economy.
Yes.
So, I mean, is this like deep state versus political expedience? Is that the dynamic that's here?
I don't know what you really mean by that. I would say, no, this is reality versus a few talking heads. I really don't believe that there's that many radical people, whether that's right or the left. I don't really believe that there's too many of those radical people. And most people are hardworking, center of the road people. They just want to do what they're supposed to get ahead and get ahead. I don't think there's a lot of people out there that are wanting all of this intervention from the government in every aspect of their lives. So I think that you hear a lot of stuff because that's going to rile up support. It's going to rile up people talking about them. Like when a senator says something, they're going to make headlines, and then their name is going to be, when it comes up on the ballot, that person's going to recognize they saw that name in the headline, not necessarily what they stand for or anything like that, but it's just a popularity contest. And so I think that has a lot to do with it.
Okay. I mean, I think that that's very fair, and I don't have much to add there. Let's go back to Bitcoin coming up very early on in Powell's testimony. The whole point of this show is we are a macroeconomic show that acknowledges Bitcoin's rightful place. I think it's helpful for me and you to kind of just talk about, you know, this transition from Bitcoin not mattering to Bitcoin being at the center of all things macro. And I feel like the fact that, once again, Powell is talking about Bitcoin, about digital currencies, and the fact that Bitcoin came up at the beginning of a conversation that's not exclusively about Bitcoin is just another data point to show that, despite whether you acknowledge it or not, like Bitcoin is making a difference. Bitcoin is changing the world around us today and will probably continue.
Yeah, I mean, where do you want to take this? Because we could talk about Bitcoin infrastructure building out. We could talk about all the things that seem to line up with Bitcoin. Every time you turn around, the incentives seem to be aligned, and it's just the next step forward in the process. So we could take it anywhere you want to.
Well, let's talk about like every time you turn the corner, the incentives seem to be aligned with Bitcoin. That's actually like a quote that you kind of popularized for me was Bitcoin aligns incentives. So, I mean, I think you've been thinking about this from a macro perspective for a long, long time.
Yeah, I mean, sound money aligns incentives. It's not necessarily a Bitcoin thing. It could have been gold in the past, but then gold was kind of hijacked and perverted and captured and all this. So it doesn't work so well with gold anymore. Bitcoin is a pristine asset that is, I would say, incorruptible at this point. And so that is just the best quality of money that we have. And so the best quality of money, its natural thing that it does is align incentives and align people's behavior. So it's just a fact of nature. It's not necessarily because Bitcoin was made so great. It's because Bitcoin is so incorruptible the way it turned out. Sorry about that.
Ansel's getting passionate here, slamming on the desk. Um, yeah, I mean, so I think this kind of goes back to what we're saying about central bankers kind of manipulating and altcoiners manipulating human action with economics, right? This idea that you can use monetary policy to influence people, whereas Bitcoin, its monetary policy, it's no monetary policy. It's just a hard cap, very, very simple. And Bitcoin itself reflects reality rather than like fighting reality or trying to manipulate reality.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have anything else to add about that. Unless you
So,
have
I mean, talking about like, let's zoom out. Bitcoin Tina has said this on the famous Bitcoin Tina on Bitcoin podcast with Bitcoin Magazine. I think I just said Bitcoin like 7 times in one sentence, but he said that the world will bend to Bitcoin, right? And that's something that we think is a reality, but it's not popularly accepted. Like how and why are macro forces going to continue to align with Bitcoin? And where do you kind of see, the incumbents uh, expediting that, right? Or expediting that?
Oh man. Well, this is probably going to be an unpopular opinion because I don't think that Bitcoin really is for the unbanked. Remember that meme that was popularized by like Andreas or somebody way back in the day that Bitcoin is going to bank the unbanked. I really don't think so. I think Bitcoin will make everybody a little bit more wealthy, right? Because it's good money and the economy will grow in general. But the people that need to adopt it aren't necessarily the unbanked in the world. It's the big money. It's these huge liquidity pools, huge wealth pools in the world that need to adopt Bitcoin. And once they're starting to do this, or at least starting to get very interested in it. It might not happen this round, this cycle, but that is who needs to adopt Bitcoin for it to take off. And so I am very interested in looking at that angle. And those are the people that drive these macro conversations. They're the heads of banks or in control of banks, in control of sovereign wealth funds, all sorts of things like that. They need to get on board with Bitcoin. Now, I have thought of something recently, and I credit you with taking me on this, challenging me with it being different this time or not being different this time. And perhaps we're reaching the S curve of adoption, where it just goes to the moon and it never comes back down. I think that is legit when you talk about like technological adoption, but not necessarily the price. So I think the price will continue in its sawtooth type pattern that we've seen over the last 12 years. But we're kind of waiting for a technological adoption, right? Because I really don't use Lightning Network. I very rarely send Bitcoin, maybe once or twice a year. It's just not used as a technology yet. And so at least transactionally, it's used as a savings vehicle. But the actual adoption of uses is going to have to take off before we see the inevitable blow off top in price, maybe 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road. What are your thoughts on that?
Why so bearish, man? Why so bearish? I mean, I haven't quite made up my mind yet. Is this the last cycle? I think that obviously this time is different in terms of Bitcoin transforming into a legitimate asset. It is in that transition phase from illegitimate to legitimate, at least as like a global Schelling point, right? People are saying things like, I wish I could just get one Bitcoin, stuff like that. Like, I feel like I wish I could just get one Bitcoin. It's like, I wish I could just get $1 million. Like, it's turning into this thing that common people who don't even know what the halving is, they lust for it. They know it's valuable. Like the Lindy is there. So I think it's interesting to like try to justify its role in macro in the future and try to convince people who don't already believe that is the case. But it's hard to tell. Like, this time is different is like famous last words. It's classic famous last words. We've, everything thus far in terms of price action, behavior of price, it's consistent. Like today is a 20% drawdown. We've consistently seen 20 to 30% drawdowns in every Bitcoin bull market. And guess what? They're claiming that this bull market is being driven by institutions and not necessarily by retail, not necessarily by the halving, but everything has been the same so far. So, it's hard to say that you're wrong until there's evidence otherwise. But we'll see in 2022 if we just, like Tina predicted, keep going up, massive reprice up and go flat, or if we have a blow off top and start consolidation again.
Yeah, I guess I'm the bear in the Bitcoin space, but I mean, being bearish, wanting 5% a week, that seems kind of crazy to be a bear, but I'm probably one of the most bearish people with a Bitcoin podcast. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. So I would call it bearish. Maybe you would call it realistic. So last question, and then I think we can wrap this podcast up. But if you were to talk to someone who's paying attention to macro, maybe they're a gold bug, maybe they're into bonds, they are well aware of, the debauchery that has been happening on a central banking level for years, but they don't believe in Bitcoin. They don't understand Bitcoin. How would you articulate Bitcoin's growth within this kind of chaos to them?
Oh boy. Well, it's going to become seen as pristine collateral. And I don't know who exactly said that. It might have been Michael Saylor. It might have been Nick Bhatia, but somebody in the recent past has called it pristine collateral. And I think that is probably what it's going to be seen as in the near future. So, for example, when you have the repo market, you are trying to get overnight cash and you send them or you use the contracts to swap treasuries for cash overnight, and then you reverse that or roll that over the next day or whatever. I can see that role being used with Bitcoin, or Bitcoin being used in that role of treasuries. Now, how long will that take? It probably can happen pretty quickly. I know gold is used as collateral to a small degree. And we see some of the, I guess, conspiracy theories about gold being smashed on the markets. You always hear the gold bug saying, oh, they smashed gold again and yada, yada, yada. Well, that's a lot of times that's because these collateral agreements run out at a certain exact time, like on Mondays or Tuesdays or whatever. And so then a bunch of gold just comes back on the market from these collateral contracts. So I can see Bitcoin working its way in there with gold, and then eventually working its way in there with treasuries. It couldn't happen quickly on a like a 5-year scale. It'll seem very quick, but in the moment, it's going to seem like it's going slow. But I can see maybe in the next 4 to 8 years, we're going to see a lot of Bitcoin used in repo and in this high-powered money market funds.
Okay. I mean, that makes sense, and maybe that's being accelerated by QE because some people, probably the uneducated, QE equals money printing. But to people who really know what's happening, QE just means assets being sucked out of the repo market. The Fed is now the buyer of all assets, and they're sucking it all up, and they're replacing it with treasury reserves. So maybe the fact that central banks across the world are sucking up collateral in the repo markets, effectively choking out these repo markets, maybe that's going to create an opportunity for Bitcoin to fit in as an asset that can settle natively digitally.
Yeah, and I guess I'll earn my bear moniker right now, because I think that there needs to be a lot of deceleration and decline in the world. We have enjoyed, living high off the hog on credit card and globalization for so long, and Bitcoin will return us to sustainable growth. But that initial crash is going to hurt, and it's going to hurt really bad in a lot of places. I'm very bearish China, like I'm pretty bearish on Europe and other places. They're going to have to I guess just be happy with a slightly lower standard of living for the next few years while Bitcoin works its way into the financial system.
But let's just say humanity makes it past the pain. We're transitioning into a Bitcoin system. What next, right? I would argue that maybe we don't even feel a reduction in standard of living because all of, our allocation of time and capital right now is being skewed to things that aren't making us happy, aren't improving our lives. It's, we're kind of like running the rat race and people are unhappy. There's record levels of depression. There's record levels of, debauchery, drug usage, every indicator that human psychology is not tip top shape. So, I could see a world where, hey, maybe there's, things kind of blow up. We're burning down the system, but we quickly, it maybe depending on how quickly, individuals adopt Bitcoin, but they quickly start moving into a world where they have more time, where capital is not misallocated as much. And maybe it's a different world, but I don't necessarily think that quality of life will necessarily go down because of it.
I'm not as optimistic about that. Remember when we interviewed Max Kaiser? Great episode, guys. Should go watch that. He talked about depopulation was one of his D's. And I don't think it's going to be so easy for people to adjust. I think there's going to be pretty bad times ahead for a lot of places in the world. And you just have to be a prepper and kind of look for what's going. Bitcoin is a great way to prep, but also look at your jurisdiction that you live in. And is it Is there a possibility that there's going to be violence around you? Is there going to be revolution or whatever? So people have to look at that, not just Bitcoin. That's also an awesome first step, but they need to prep in other ways as well.
All right, Ansel, I think that this was a great show. Different than our typical format. We started with Bitcoin and ended with Bitcoin, which is awesome.
And prepping.
Ansel, where can people find you? Stay prepped, stay up to date.
Oh man. Okay. So I have my Bitcoin and Markets podcast. I've released one episode recently. I'm going to try to get more out in a timely manner. And I do my free newsletter on bitcoinandmarkets.com, as well as a member newsletter. So check that out. And lastly, I've started writing stuff at the website btcm.co. It's just a kind of a research blog to scratch my itch of looking into this economic history and writing about it. I have a friend writing with me. So yeah, that's really fun. Check out btcm.co.
Yeah, Moist Turtle, Kent, he's the man. Your partner there at BTCM, and he's going to be jumping on Bitcoin Magazine Happy Hour this Thursday, so tomorrow. So catch Ansel's colleague, very smart guy, very well read in all things macro. Tomorrow on the Bitcoin Magazine live stream, as well as on btcm.co. You guys can find me at CK_Snarks and at Bitcoin Magazine. And make sure to go to b.tc/conference and get your ticket to Bitcoin 2021. You're going to be able to find me and every other Bitcoiner stateside over there. Use code Satoshi, all caps, for 10% off. And that is it from me. That is it from Ansel. We have a long list of fantastic guests coming on the show. So make sure to share, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And yeah, keep stacking, Bitcoiners. Peace.